Great. Welcome everyone to today's Design in Dialogue. Our conversation today will be about 45 minutes with Sarah, followed by Q&A. So if you have any questions for Sarah, put them down in the chat box and we can go through them. We're going to record this for archive purpose and we'll also put it on Vimeo shortly. We are also muting everyone to ensure audio clarity. I guess that's it. Let's turn to Glenn.
Thank you, Lucy. And hello, Sarah. Welcome to Design in Dialogue. It's great to have you here. Just a couple of announcements. First, to repeat what Lucy just said, if you have any questions for Sarah as we talk, please put them in the chat box and we'll get back to them at the end of the conversation. And also, if you don't mind letting us know where you're calling in from, zooming in from, please put that in the chat box as well. We'd love to know where people are actually physically sitting as they listen to us. And I do also want to have a quick note of apology for Wednesday because we actually had to postpone, unfortunately, Oki Sato's interview in the series. So Oki Sato from Nendo will be coming back, but something came up and he just wasn't able to join us on Wednesday. So sorry about that. But today we're super lucky and happy to have Sarah with us. Sarah, you are presumably zooming in from Dallas.
I am live from my attic, yes, in Dallas, Texas.
How appropriate to our moment.
Yes, it feels.
And you're on brand, t-shirt wise.
Yes, I try and stay committed to my identity, and a shout out to Lori Haycock-Makela.
Absolutely. So we are going to get to Speechless, which is one of your more recent shows. But first, and I'm going to plunge right into images because we have so many to show.
I'm a visual person.
Aren't we all? Especially on this series. So we're actually going to take a step back before you came to Dallas and talk about particularly your work in Atlanta, but actually even before the High Museum, where you were for several years, you were at the Wolfsonian, which I think is when we first met, 15, 20 years ago by now.
Oh, it was like 5. It was just 5 years ago.
Let's pretend.
Right.
So
and prior to that, I was at Cranbrook.
And before that, Cranbrook, indeed. So you went to the High Museum about when?
2011.
2011, okay. And do you want to just talk us through just a couple of the projects that you did while you were there?
Yeah, what I wanted to talk about was really, the shift for me from the Wolfsonian to the High was really about going to be a decorative arts and design curator in an encyclopedic museum. And that idea of really thinking through being in charge of a collection that dealt with a breadth of time and media. And so I embarked on a bunch of projects, and that's what these first couple slides are, of trying to look at the historic works that we had in the collection and connect with contemporary makers to think about them in new ways and create relevance between both people interested in contemporary, but also people in historic. So this was Molly Hatch, and she did this massive plate wall painting based off of our Staffordshire plates that we had in the collection. And this, I think, is still up, but it's on a wall that is like at the entrance, so it can take light. It's dishwasher safe. It's about, I think it's about like 16 by 12 feet. So it's the biggest thing she's ever done, or at that time. And it was a really great way to rethink the context of what patterning on a plate is, but hopefully then draw people back to our 18th century ceramics collection.
Right, which is no mean feat, in fact, because those collections often do languish outside of the main attention of the visitors. So it's incredible the way that you flew the flag for that collection right out front.
Yeah, so it was a really exciting project, and exciting, and I think always, you're always trying to think, what are spaces other people can't use, and how can I use them in really interesting ways?
Yes, you're very opportunistic in that way, in fact, which I think is really interesting. We'll see more of that in a second, the way you use the interstitial spaces and the surrounding spaces of the museum just as actively as the galleries.
Thank you.
Yeah.
These are two by Roberto Lugo, a phenomenal ceramic artist. And I had seen a work he had done on his century vases. The High owns one, and I asked if he would. I love really commissioning. I really love working with artists and designers, makers, whatever you want to tag yourself as. But in thinking about doing something that makes sense to the collection that I'm working with and the community that I'm in. So I asked him to make one based on Atlanta and to look at 100 years of Atlanta. And it was really fun to also give people that opportunity to do a project where the commission is set. It's going in a museum collection. So it's like, go big and know it's in perpetuity, and think about that as the parameter. And that was really, really a fun project. So you have, there's Jimmy Carter, Andre 3000, the Orly crash, Martin Luther King is in place of George Washington. And I think, he talks about these pieces as conduits for conversation. And I really think that I really have kind of embraced that as an idea for what objects can be and how we can use them in a museum. So trying to think about ways to connect people both to in this case, their community in Atlanta, and what is the history of Atlanta, positive and negative, but also how that connects to this legacy of using decorative arts as a way to, promote ideas and be great. And that's, that Wolfsonian, right? The power and impact of art and design.
That's right. Yeah. And then you have a similar story with the work below where.
So we took the Jazz Bowl and he did the hip hop version.
Victor Schreckengoss Jazz Bowl. Yeah. Yeah, I guess, one thing which we might talk about a little more is the kind of pressure that you're putting on an artist when they have a commission to go into a space like the Molly Hatch, or have an object that goes into the collection even. It's like you're opening the door, but also, like saying, this is really your turn at bat. And I suppose that's, you have to work hard to make that a good kind of pressure instead of a bad kind of pressure.
Yeah, you'd have to ask them what their feeling is, because I'm sure it's inconsistent.
Well, we will.
But I think it's, I try and be, I don't feel like you make that ask and then you walk away. It's a journey. It's about, and it depends how much they want to work with you and you work with them and what that chemistry and connection is. But you are nurturing the project. You are stewarding it, and that's part to me of what it means to curate in that context, is really helping them, and when they have questions or concerns, being available and accessible to work through that.
Yeah. One more example of that kind of work.
Yeah, this was a great project that came out of the High has an amazing collection of civil rights photography, which of course, because of it being photography, can't be on view. So we just threw out this idea of trying to work. So we worked with Justin Rothshank, who does a lot of amazing transferware work. And so these are our photos from our collection that he has actually then used in this, and he's a kind of drew it on this kind of Mennonite picture and this kind of idea of what unity and peace means, but it's all based off of images from our photography collection. So it was a way to get that photography basically out on view all the time, because the ceramics don't have the same challenges, but in a new and interesting way.
It's a great way of thinking about contemporary collaborations as a way of extending the power and the content of the collection as an archive. And then just to show a little bit of your range, Sarah, of course, you weren't just working with contemporary designers when you were at Atlanta, and indeed now at Dallas. And one of the projects for which you're perhaps best known, in fact, is this Dream Cars show, which was, I unfortunately, super unfortunately didn't see it. I would have given my eye teeth to see it, but it looks like it was an absolute, just spectacular, mouth-watering design show.
Well, to me, I'm really inspired about creativity. That's always the root of what I'm trying to think through. So the show was about the evolution and history of concept cars, but it was that idea of, if you dream it, you can make it. And I think that's such an impactful message to give to the community. Just to large, to basically tell anybody, if you imagine something. And that's what the show so much was about. It wasn't just about GM and big car companies coming up with the next iteration of ideas. It was, one of the photos you see here is the electric oof, which was this little egg car that was made during World War II, during the Nazi occupation of Paris. So it's an electric car that you could drive around. He made one for himself. And we found it, and I found it in a little collection, in the National Car Collection in Toulouse. They were like shocked that I wanted to borrow it, and then it made it into Vanity Fair. So I feel like I made a star out of a little car. But and then the one on the bottom I love, that is a proposed thing for women, the kind of car a woman would like in the 60s, which has a removable shopping cart. But maybe in like the COVID pandemic world, having your own shopping cart to go through, maybe an idea to
that'll come
revitalize.
I have to
But
say,
it was fun, and it was fun to think about who collects drawings and who collects the actual works and how those worlds kind of intermix. It was a fun project.
I desperately love the Electric Oath. The sort of Jacques Tati meets Buckminster Fuller energy of that is unimprovable. I guess, you know, there's a very interesting relationship between the concept car as a template or genre of design and some of the more contemporary speculative designers that you've worked on, like Iris Van Herpen, the fashion designer, and then another image of her work, and then Joris Larman, who you did a really wonderful show at the High that also had traveled around to other places, including the Cooper Hewitt. There was a version of it there as well.
Yeah, he was, and that was a show done by actually Mark Wilson and Suan van der Zipper from the Groninger that came here, just to give them credit where it's due. But I think, you know, for Joris, it was so great because Joris is my bookends for the High. The first day I started at the High, I met him and he was installing this voxel piece. And it was just like we were just talking about it the other day, like what a weird meeting that was. It's sort of like, who are you, you know? and then it was, you know, I hope for him, but for me, it was the start of just a really great relationship, and really have learned so much. I think he's so inspiring. And then we just continue to do projects with and continue to think through projects. And then the last show that opened at the High was his, you know, kind of, I hate to say retrospective because it wasn't, but sort of where he is now and looking at that. So it was a great thing. This was a piece we acquired for the museum. So the High owns, I think, the largest amount of Joris's work outside of the Groninger. Amazing. So and the High's mantra, at least when I was there and was collecting, was go deep on a few. And so think about people you really think are interesting and you want to support. And I really believe in the idea that museums are patrons and that we are incubators of ideas. I mean, that's why I like to do commissions. I like to think about supporting and promoting people to make outside of the sort of commercial realm and to take some pressure off. I mean, your point is I add pressure, but it's a different kind of pressure. But I think that idea that we have that opportunity to support creativity and making, and then to amplify it and to think about how it connects with the community.
Yours is such a good example of that too. And I don't know whether you would accept this comparison, but I think this Dragon Bench, which is made famously, probably most people listening know this, but it's made using a robotically controlled, essentially 3D printer for metal that can travel in free space, like making a physical drawing in midair. And it strikes me that it's actually a little bit like a concept car in the sense that it's announcing a kind of speculative strategy of future making and opening up a whole new arena of manufacture sort of before the factory system is ready for it.
Well, and that's what I love about, you know, Iris and yours are great examples about people who are not limited by their ideas. So they have amazing ideas and then they try and figure out how to make it. And they work. And so, you know, in some cases, like I think with the piece we showed with Iris, I mean, some pieces took her 5 years to make because whatever she imagined, the technology wasn't there yet to help her produce the idea. And so she just waited. She just waited and kept figuring and kept sort of doing that. And I think, you know, Joris is similar, you know, in different ways. I mean, he's just going out and making it. He's just trying to figure out what is the machine that can make the idea that I want to make. And I find those kind of thinkers, they're just so exciting because they're just pushing and pushing. And then you're like, how do I support you so you can go further?
Yeah. And it's really like they're creating a whole universe of possibilities, and to be the conduit by which that can actually land in a public space, that must be incredibly gratifying.
Well, that's what you want. I mean, we're here to be, you know, supporters and amplifiers.
Yeah.
So how do you build that connection for them and help them?
Just to pick up that point earlier about working across the campus and sort of shifting the landscape of curatorial activity, this is just a little montage of some of the other installations that you did. And
I had a great opportunity. I worked really closely with our education department at the High, but we have this beautiful Renzo piano piazza, which is very, when it's empty, is photographs beautifully, but feels a little desolate. And so it was a project, and the parameters that we put on this project was that the artists selected had to work for 2 years. So the first year I always felt like they kind of pulled out their known entity, because it's a super tight time frame. It was like 6 months that they had to do it and, propose and make, and then it had to show up, and there's a lot of liability issues, and as you can imagine. But then I always wanted them to come back the next year, because then they really connected with the community. And then they were like, oh, I've got to outdo myself. I've got to think bigger, broader, and take what I've learned and go farther. And so that was really an exciting project. And I learned so much about how the public engages and the power that we have to affect that kind of ripple. I mean, I feel like, people talk about that with Cranbrook, that the people who went to Cranbrook, there's this innate sort of ripple of being in a Sarnan world, and what that does to you. And I feel like this, I mean, we had so many people who were coming to the piazza on their daily walks, and that's where they were starting to play. And the fact that people were playing on Jaime Hayon, like wood pigs, instead of, so it was really magical. And the creativity that it was generating, that these were platforms to spark the imagination, I felt was a gift. I mean, it was a gift for me to be part of it, but also thinking about how you try and engage interaction. And like one of the big things we learned with this really quickly on was how to make something that people linger in versus deep bursts of joy. And so that first piece, which is the houses, was the first we did. And that we had swings and hammocks, and the swings, like, people loved, but they do it for like 3 minutes and they were out.
Yeah.
The hammocks, people would come every night and read their newspaper. And it was just kind of awesome. I mean, it was just an amazing thing to be like, people have, like, we talk about wanting to become the fabric of people's lives. I mean, that's our goal. But to see like somebody is showing up every day at 5:30 and reading their newspaper and taking a nap, and like, just like, it was really magical.
Yeah, how great is that? It's interesting too to think about the seriousness with which curators really do need to consider ideas like dwell time that you might expect somebody in like an amusement park or Disney World to talk about. But of course, it's super relevant when you're doing this kind of work too. I did want to mention, by the way, that we had just a week ago, we had an absolutely amazing interview with James Wines from Site Architecture. And, he's coined so many memorable lines, but one is this idea of plop art. So the sculpture that just sits inertly in one of these desolate plazas and does absolutely nothing for you. And I feel like he would really approve of these projects as kind of activating and creating social space.
When you had to, one of the weird things you had to think about was like signage. Like, I really had to fight like almost no signage, because the minute you put a sign up, it becomes like a don't touch.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And so, how do you so we tried to make rules and like, be respectful. I mean, this comes back up in Speechless, but like, how do you explain the rules, but then be like, we're not telling you not to do things. How do you skew positive?
Skew positive. That's a good, especially for right now. Now, speaking of skewing positive, your story at the Dallas Museum of Art has been a very productive and generative one. We're only going to be really looking in depth at a couple of exhibition projects and then a couple of commissions, but this, just to say, this is kind of tip of the iceberg. But we're going to start off with Women Plus Design. So here, for example, we're seeing Mobile by Faye Toogood, who was on the program also a couple of weeks ago. We had Faye on Design Dialogue also. So can you say a little bit about why you wanted to do an exhibition focusing particularly on women in the design world?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's obvious, the answer. I mean, why wouldn't we? I think it's, a really great thing to focus on. I think what I wanted to do, I did this show in like 4 months. There was just a slot, which tends to be how I roll. A slot opened up, and I think the idea for this to me was, how do we start to really ramp up on the contemporary collection here, which is part of what I was, why I came there and what I was brought to do. But how do you build on that idea of being an incubator? And so I didn't want to do a show about women in design. I wanted to do acquisitions. I wanted to say, we're acquiring these pieces. This is about not just saying we're interested, but we're committed. And that was really important to me. And so we, went out, and so some are pieces that had already kind of been produced. We commissioned a few, but it was also about showing. So it wasn't as broad as I would have wanted to be. I mean, some of it was about what was ready. I pushed some people to finish some pieces, like Najla, but really hard. So she finished that piece earlier than she had hoped for us to be able to put it in that show. But I think the idea of saying, what are women designers making now, and how can we support that? And how can we say we're kind of putting a stake in the ground? I set up the title of the show to be hopefully iterative, so that we could continue to look at other lenses and slices and continue to think about it in different ways.
You mean the new works part of the title, like different groups
New
of
works,
people?
but maybe the diversity angle shifts, and what is it? Maybe it's not about women. Maybe it's about designers from Africa, or people who are dealing with, that are Latinx or whatever. I don't know. I just wanted it to be open, so that, because it was a little bit like a focus show, but a pocket of acquisitions that we were trying to make. And I think it was really exciting. And then what I really wanted to do, which you can kind of see in the slides you ran through, was I wanted to show the range of what the collection is. So we have an amazing collection of jewelry, which we see as more than just adornment for the body, but we see them as works of art. And so that idea of showing the different scales of objects, the different types of objects, and that design is a big term that covers a lot of things and a lot of ideas, I think was really exciting. So I think there was in all maybe just 12 or 14 pieces. So it was a small show, but we packed a lot in, and we tried to pack a lot of ideas. I mean, this is Carrie Dickens' Comfort Me, which I feel like I really would want right now, but you wear it like a weighted blanket. It's 3D printed. It's an amazing piece, but it was just a fun project to just, again, sometimes you just want to plant seeds. You just want to try and say, what happens if we start to think about these ideas and we start to push it, and really push it in a really strong way. I mean, I really feel strongly about like trying to acquire stuff if possible, because I feel like you're committing.
The commitment of the institution seems like it has even more significance when you're addressing an area where the design field in general has been skewed negatively. So you have a kind of underrepresentation of women in the field clearly, and it's one thing to do a show, but it's another thing to actually say, the Dallas Museum is going to step up to the plate and actually acquire these things. They're going to be part of the permanent collection. Here we're looking, of course, at the work of Katie Stout. Which was spotted. Yeah. What did you do with the? I'm interested in this because when I was at MAD, we did a show called Pathmakers, which was partly historical as well as contemporary, looking at women's involvement in design and craft. And we got some pushback here and there from, patrons, from some of the participating artists, from some press and members of the public, about corralling women in a kind of ghetto situation, which I'm sure must have been a discussion that came at you as well when you did this. And I wonder how you handled that. Or maybe it didn't come at you, but I'm curious to know what. Oh, that's interesting.
But I think no. I mean, I think everyone was just really excited. I mean, we as an institution had been doing a series of shows and continue to do a series of shows that promote women. I mean, that is really one of the. We are. Like many institutions, but we're very serious about trying to explore diversity and be representative of the community that we exist in, and that is a journey. I mean, we will continue to work. It is not a one stop and you do a show and you're done, or you collect a couple works and you're finished. I think we're really committed as to really trying to continue to think through that and push ourselves and challenge ourselves to do that. And so shows like this are, it's the part of the constellation. You're building a path and you're just trying to continue to try different ways. And so, sometimes it shows up in our European galleries with historic works that we're, trying to collect of women artists like Bert Morso or other, so it's about, panoply. It's not just me doing contemporary design. It's about the institution and the art world really committing to diversity and inclusion in real ways.
You know, it reminds me of the current show that's on, well, obviously not visible, but it is in the galleries, called Women Take the Floor, which Noni Gadsden has curated at the MFA Boston. It's a big project about women represented in the collection. And one thing that she said to me was that she was very concerned to be transparent about, as it were, the problem that the museum has with representing women in the collection. And she actually, you know, published the statistics, which are shocking, as to how many women are actually represented collection wide, and really sent a signal there that there was a lot left to do, despite the fact that you have a show like this happening. And I guess part of the optics around a show, even a tighter, more, you know, precisely conceived one like this one, is that it's trying to roll back a tide that's been rolling in for a long time of sexism, frankly.
Well, my feeling is I can't go back. I can only go forward.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm just trying to push it. So, yeah. I'm thrilled to be at an institution that is 100% supportive of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great. Okay, let's now plunge into maybe the main topic.
That's an awesome transition.
So this is the
it's how hard I really work during the day, as my husband will tell you.
This is a nice moment we're capturing here, and that's a piece by Misha Khan, who was actually our first guest on the series.
Oh yeah, I love Misha. This was me hugging. I was testing the huggability of a prototype. It was a little funny, but it was a lot of fun. No, this was a show that has been a huge passion project for me. I very transparent about that, and really rooted in some transitions that happened for me in my own life, which is, you know, I was working on all these outdoor playscapes, and those are ideas that are obviously very interesting to me and push me. But I have 2 children, and my youngest has a expressive language disorder, and so he wasn't talking. This is him at 6 last year, and so I was all of a sudden in this situation where I talk about the power and impact of art and how art communicates ideas, but I talk about it with words. And that's how I communicate, and that's where I'm comfortable. And all of a sudden, one of the people who's the most important people to me in the world isn't interested in talking. They're not interested in the way I communicate. And I had to totally reboot the way I thought about things. And I really started to think about, what is the role we have as a museum? What is the role that all these repository of images and making that we have, and how do we connect in a really different way to our community? And how can we be impactful in bigger and deeper ways? And so I literally had a dream about an idea. And I had an exhibition meeting the next day, and I wrote 4 sentences, and I pitched this crazy idea. And, you know, Rand Suffolk, to his credit, said, "It's super half-baked, Sarah," but I say, keep going. I see something in there. And that was when I still at the High, and I was able to get a little feeder grant. And the whole impetus of the show was, what I had been learning from these outdoor playscapes was, we were struggling with issues about accessibility and how to make them fully accessible. Because a lot of times where people go is they go to where they are affected in their personal lives. So if you have somebody who's dealing with autism, you will naturally grab to that, or they go to mobility. And so they'll say, I made an accessible piece because it's wheelchair accessible. But as we know, accessibility is way broader than that. And so I felt like, what happens if we go to the medical and science community and say, come teach us, come talk to us about all these ideas, about these different ways the brain works and how we receive information and process it, and sensory issues, and help us learn how to design more effectively and more impactfully. So I spent time, and in the middle of this, I ended up moving to Dallas. Dallas wanted to do the show too, so it became a collaborative project. And so we hosted, it was about 1.5 years ago, I called it a convening, and I brought 8 specialists from the Dallas community who dealt with neuroscience and autism and dementia and sensory de-escalation. They were PTs, they were theoreticians, and then I invited 7 artists, and we all got in a room together, and for 2 days we had this amazing conversation. And for me, it was the most electrifying moment of my career, just to kind of like have all this, these different ideas of thinking and creativity and what people are passionate and working towards, and see how those interconnect and commingle, and have people stop thinking, at least for the artists, I think it stopped being about how can I shine, but what can we do? How can this project be a collective? And so the idea of the project was they went off to make immersive, interactive, it had to be interactive, which is a tough thing now to think about, but it was, it had to be totally touchable and interactive, and that we weren't going to use words. We were going to think about how to communicate an idea using other senses or other ways to express that. And I was pretty open-ended, but I went to visit them every couple months. So I traveled a lot. I mean, it's a show you just couldn't do now. It's kind of weird to think about it now. But, and then the book, and then I worked with, so Laurie Haycock Mackler was somebody I knew very peripherally from the Cranbrook world. Amazing designer, become one of like my best friends in the world. I just love her. And she helped me do the book. And I was like, the book, you are a designer. Like, I'm not inviting you at the end, you're in with it, the whole thing. I mean, she's a really interesting person who has a really interesting story about, you know, twice she's had brain hemorrhages. She's had to relearn how to do everything. And she always goes back to design. And so I was like, you are the person to do this for me. And we did this whole book, and the book is a series of interviews and this process and all. So if you in this book, like, this is the drawing I sent to her when I was visiting Yuri and Eni. And she was like, I don't understand what the show is going to look like. And I was like, I drew this out and I took a picture, and she's like, okay, I'm putting it in the book. Like, this is like your crazy brain thing of how you think the show is going to lay out.
Oh, can we look at the cephalopod?
Oh yeah, so I mean, and that's how I felt like through this was like my spirit animal. I really felt like I got better and better at describing what the show was about still. But I think that was part of the kind of journey of it. It was like trying to find the words to understand what I wanted to do and what I hoped to do. And my big hope with the show was to create empathy, to realize that we all experience the world in really different ways. We see things differently. We think about things differently. And there's a real beauty to that when you let go of your own conceptions of trying to make people understand the world the way you see it. And that was kind of like the idea. How do I go into Yuri's world and see how Yuri sees the world? And how does that shift the way I think about things? And do I see them? And so I wanted it to not be like, it's a show about empathy. Come on in. But what I hope is, again, that ripple. I'm always like interested in what happens in 5 years when you start to think, oh, that was a really interesting idea.
Well, I suppose also there's a way in which even the title, Speechless, it of course has this reference even to your own personal experience with your son, and then this idea of non-linguistic communication. But I suppose you could also interpret it as a kind of mission statement about the exhibition as not just being an argument that's unfolded in the galleries. And I always think that a really well curated show should be one that can be appreciated by somebody who doesn't speak the language of the text panels, or more likely doesn't read them. Because exhibitions are really physical, visual experiences. And I feel like this show is really the kind of apex of that.
I mean, to me, if you do not have wall power, I'm not going to read the label. Like, yeah. I mean, that's just my philosophy. Like, I'm all about ideas and deep meaning, but if I've got to read 5 pages before I get what the piece is about.
Yeah. Well, let's look at a couple
for me personally.
Let's look at just a few of the designers who participated. So one is Ini Archibong.
They're all really attractive people.
I've noticed that. I wasn't going to say it, but so
I did not. I was blind in my picking.
so this project was called Touching Sound, and I have a few images of it, so I'll just go through them relatively.
Yeah, so Eni is somebody I have been talking to, and for some of these people, I have been talking to them about this idea for 3 or 4 years. I mean, this was a long journey with these people. These people have become like family. They're very, as most of the people I work with, I tend to invest deep, and so warning if you're going to work with me, it is a whole. It's a whole thing. It can be. But Eni, I was really fascinated with Eni because Eni, when he designs, also composes music. And it's a very fluid thing for him. And we talked a lot about that. And, he's definitely one where I didn't know where he was going with it. I didn't know. I mean, I think we worked through different ideas of what was possible, but I think that was a very, very exciting way to do it. And we pushed each other to think. But the idea was, how would you imagine what sound looks like? You turn these capsules, they change colors. It's all very bespoke. It's hand-blown glass. There's a pool of water. So he was interested in exploring cymatics and that idea that as you moved the different capsules, the soundscape in the room changed, but it also changed the shape of the water, and you were manipulating it. One of the things we learned, here's a little thing we did not anticipate. People really love to turn those capsules, and they all wanted immediate gratification. So whereas it was imagined as being this more communal, harmonious, and everything was all kind of pure sounds, so no discordant sounds. I mean, he wanted it to be very beautiful, and he has these beautiful, sorry, overusing the word, these wonderful statements in the book about that he sees beauty as a way out of the kind of darkness in his life, or darkness in moments in his life. And I thought that's a really different way than I think about what beauty means. And I thought it was, again, it just changed, it shifts your perspective, and it shifted the way that I thought about it. And then what was really great, so the book was delayed because we had to get installation shots, because of course we didn't know what these things were going to look like until we built them in the gallery. And so we invited all the artists and their families to come for the photo shoot. So this is all these shots in here are all of the people's nephews. There's a lot of my own kids. They just got, they signed a waiver. I signed a waiver for them. So.
I have to ask, what was Vaughn's reaction to the show? Can you talk about that?
I think his biggest, so this show was featured also in PBS.
Yeah, your son's reaction, I should say, Vaughn.
My son. Well, he was featured in PBS. So they ran a story about this on the PBS NewsHour. And so he did think he was a YouTube star, which I found kind of scary. For me, it was totally gratifying. It is the only show they have asked to bring friends back to. They stayed for like 2 hours. They really loved it. I think it was a really, it was great. It was a great show. It is a great show.
Let's have a look at Misha's.
Oh yeah, Misha, I love this picture.
Another handsome fella. So he He's a trickster.
He's a mischief maker.
Absolutely.
He was one, where we really, so many ideas. He just had so many ideas, and we, sometimes I'm like, was I making it worse? I was like, yeah, that sounds so great. Like, okay, could we do that? And maybe we were each other's own worst enemies. But this was a maquette for one, which was going to be this whole thing you walked through, and then we would have to, then that's where I have to come in and say, what about the guards, and how would we control
health and safety? Yeah.
What's the practical thing? And but he had so many great ideas. I mean, everybody did, but he just, so this was this whole idea. And so I would show up in his studio, and it would be like this whole, okay, we were thinking about this. And what's interesting and what we ended up with was parts of all these kind of different ideas. So what they were these inflatables. So they would, and you'll see pictures of them. So this was the core. He made these great plywood structures They have yoga balls and all kinds of things underneath them. And then soft, pliable things. This was an animation he did for it. And then they would inflate and deflate. So they would, it would take like a minute. So this was him and I testing it. So I was like, sit on it. His brother is over there like holding the blower to make it work. And then we're seeing if he gets pushed off. And I'm like, so most of the images in the book are taken by me. A lot of them just with my cell phone. But this was like, okay, can you, what would happen? So the idea was, as it was inflating or deflating, you could sit on it, you could hug it, you could touch it, it would kind of gently push you off. I mean, there's a lot of inspiration from Temple Grandin's hug machine, and that idea of wanting a tactile pressure and hugs and things, but without the human connection. Is a really beautiful, it's a beautiful piece. It's very ethereal, and it's one, and I think all of the pieces in the show were like this, but this is a great one where there's his mom, and I think very meditative when you're by yourself. I would talk to people who would sit in there for hours and just like really, and then all of a sudden like 20 people would come in and they'd start inflating and deflating, and it became really electric, and just the energy changed. But there's just two really different kinds of experiences, both which were really valuable. And I think, and the idea was we didn't tell people a lot about what was happening. So in the show itself, besides an intro text, we did graphics. We just were trying to tell people, this is how you turn the piece on. This is what you're allowed to do and not to do. Mm-hmm. And that's it. And you bring in and you take out what you want. And so we're actually unpackaging we did a lot of evaluation to sort of see what will be, and that will be the next phase of the project.
You know, one thing I noticed, Sarah, is that the ethos of transparency in the project kind of runs all the way through, like the personal notes that you put into even the way you're talking about it now, but you know, your family, the designer's family, is the idea that you're using your own iPhone shots in this kind of participant observer mode in the book. And I really noticed that with this project, that it's very upfront and direct in a way that I think institutional messaging often is not. You know, I feel like curators often hide behind the edifice, and here I feel like you're kind of out with the people in this very open way, which I think is great.
Oh, I hope so. Otherwise, you're not going to like the project. I didn't know how else to be about it. I mean, I think it was so rooted in something so personal. I think it became very personal for the people working on it. I think we were struggling. I mean, I see this as a very pioneering show. I think the way of trying to bring the artists together a year in advance and work with specialists and talk about ideas is unique. Yeah. I think that idea, I mean, a lot of them have been in group shows together and we're like, hey, I've never met you before. Or I saw you at that opening, and they became friends. I mean, they still talk to each other, and I would show up at one and the other one would be like, how's, Yuri's piece going? Does he need any help? Oh, that's so cool. There was no competition. There was just really kind of thinking through it. And I think we were all trying to push ourselves. And I think, so to me, the book is about the exploration. It's not so much about putting out a final, I just did the final word on. Yeah,
like a published thesis. Yeah. Let's very quickly, because we're about to run out of time. So let's very quickly look at last couple of.
Go along. Yuri did an amazing. So Yuri crowdsourced sounds from around the world, and this is a project that I'm super excited about because we just relaunched it. So we had done this where it's a big sphere, and you come and you listen to it, and you listen to sounds around the world. And when I called Yuri a couple weeks ago, we thought, well, what happens if we captured sounds now? I mean, we built this whole platform for people to upload sounds. So if you go to globalsounds.dma.org, you too can put up any sounds. I mean, I put sounds of my son and I doing our hand washing song. There's people doing everything, and then it's a digital thing, so you can play all those sounds, and it's really amazing. So we made it we call it the pandemic chapter. But it was this idea of how in real time can you respond to the moment we're in? How can we take something, reuse something we already had, and just build the next layer of it? So I'm really excited about it.
People can get to that on the Dallas Museum website. Is that the best way? Okay. So then we had the Ladd brothers.
So they did an amazing, so they were crowdsourcing, but more versus global, more community. So they come and do these amazing projects within the community. They were 2 weeks in Atlanta, 2 weeks in Dallas. People put their own initials. They made this wall, and you came into this room that was basically made by the community and become really enveloped in it. And it was a really, I mean, so many, and then there's pictures of everybody, their pictures. And so you would come out and see who this community is. What does community look like on a really local thing? What does it feel like? And how, even though you have so just very few variations that were usable, how many, how individual each piece looked.
Yeah.
And so I think there was something really special. And then Matt, Chakowski, he was a filmmaker that I had met, and he was working with me to really document this and got really inspired by the project. And so he made this, basically he recorded all the artists and myself talking to each other about what creativity means and empathy and what does it mean to make. And then he developed a program that was speech to text. And so it was basically, and you see it there in the center, it was translating what the designers were saying in real time, pulling from the web. So each word was pulling an image from Google or Bing or whatever it was. And so it would shift based on what was happening in the world.
Like an association machine, kind of.
So the idea was you were looking at visual things, and then this is Lori. And so then Lori did this amazing book, and then we decided to do we like each other, and what was so cool was one of the times when we were filming all the artists, we put up the PDF of the book, and actually Stephen Ladd was like, "Why is this not in the show like this? Like I never see a book like this." And you know us, we see books all the time, like spread out in like, these pages
on the wall. Yeah.
And I thought, what a great idea. And the part of the show was always to have a space that was the de-escalation zone. So you can see this in the slide. It had noise canceling headphones and weighted lap pads, and for people where things might be too stimulating. And so that was the idea, was that the whole book is spread out there. And then the other really cool thing I think you saw in the first slide that we did was the way the installation's laid out. The center space, the first space you walk into is actually empty. It has the text panel, and then it did these video screens. Matt did these little videos of each of the designers in their space. It's like a 20-minute clip showing you how to use it. So it kind of shows their own personality. We don't tell you it's them. You only just have to know it's them.
Right.
But the idea was, and then everything's color coded. So, blue was Yuri, and there's a blue line behind it, and then there's blue arrow into a space. So there's no linear path. But the idea for that partially was about knowing that you could be coming into a space with diverse challenges. You would know what you were getting into. So if you are going to find in a room of giant 14-foot inflatables overwhelming, we're telling you in advance to be prepared. And so it was a way to kind of telegraph without trying to lose the surprise, and do it in a way that I felt like it was really in the spirit of kind of the artistic.
Soft version of a trigger warning in a way.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, before we go to questions, which we will do imminently.
Okay.
Let's talk about two last commissions that you've been undertaking, which are
so this was a new commission that we did. So Chris Shank, he and I were trying to do something at the High for a long time, and then I just I abandoned him. And so then what I didn't realize was he was from Dallas. So then it was just like, wow, how can we figure that out? And so this is a piece, a real cornerstone of the DMA's collection, which is this great Martley vanity. I love vanities anyway. And so I asked Chris, what would you think about making your own interpretation of that? And that we want to do, your kind of big piece. So this is his drawing. He's working on it right now. So I have not seen it.
This is going to be epic.
But I mean, I'm so excited. And, he went to the Booker T. Washington, which is the school down the street for the arts, a really nationally renowned school. So we're so excited about how do we bring all these young generation of makers and dreamers in and be inspired and see what he did as aspirational. And so I think there's just so much that's really positive. We're really excited to support our own.
Fantastic. And then last but not least, we have David Clark, the British metalsmith.
So this was a crazy project I did, and I give kudos to the Dallas community for supporting this. We do a semi-annual Silver Supper, which is a big fundraiser for the Silver Collection, which of course the museum's renowned for. And there had been a bit of a pause, and so I had in truth cold called David because I'd seen his work and said, we have this crazy idea. I want to engage the community. What do you think? And so what we basically did, he came a couple times and we asked people to give what I would call tertiary silver. So things that they no longer wanted and they would be willing to give to us. And we asked them to write a story. They told us why it was important or of interest to them. I think it was about 35 people gave 75 pieces. David went home with like a crate full of really a mixed bag. And he made a singular piece, so it was a commission piece. There's me photobombing the piece. David gave that to you. I'm not happy, but for scale, you see how big it is. And he made this incredible piece, and he then basically pulled out all of his skill. And so there's salt baked pieces. There are pieces, flipped upside down, turned, soldered. But what was so amazing is that we debuted it the night of the event, and people were coming and they could identify. And that's where David's so brilliant. People could identify their pieces. So he's like, there's your, the handle from the teapot you gave me, and blah, blah, blah. And it was really magical. And then now this is like, what a great, and we also asked, people gave not only that were our patrons, but people who worked in the museum. So there was a lot of staff who also invested in this piece. And I love the idea that these are pieces of silver that would never be in a museum collection until they passed through the hands of David and really became transformed.
Yeah, through the portal of creativity. And of course, silver is the ultimate example of a discipline that used to be absolutely, highest perch, like this incredible high status, medium, and then it fell into total decline. And this is a great way of almost exploiting that fact and recycling this material as artistic found objects.
I think too, what was amazing for David and I was also just we were meeting people who were like, I brought out all my silver and I started polishing it. And I realized what great stuff I had. And, and you're like, yeah, that's the point. Like, use it. And, so it was really exciting to get people excited about their own collections, which I think is always really important.
Hey, before we have questions, I wonder whether we could hear from David Clark himself, because I
see he's been posting stuff.
If I can. Right.
David.
Hey.
How you doing, my friend?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Fuck. Sorry. Excellent.
That didn't take long. Good to see you. Any further commentary to offer on that project?
Yeah, I think it was extraordinary because the community was a little bit cagey to start with, but then they really got behind it. And it became kind of a bit of a competition about who could donate the biggest piece of silver, which then ramped it up into getting the most horrendous stash of stuff. But then, Sarah really, what Sarah's brilliant about is working, as you've seen in this, is like she works really well with artists. She does get the best. And so there was one point where I really needed a kick and she kicked me really hard, but it was
our conversation.
But it's, it's a fantastic opportunity, and she offers these opportunities which are just extraordinary because they're rare. In the UK, I don't know of these opportunities in the UK, but to be, thrown over to Dallas and to do your stuff in Dallas is just extraordinary. And for a museum and an institution to allow you to, not be held back, but just go for it and just really do your stuff was just, really, it was magical. It was a really fantastic project.
That's a big part of it, isn't it? It's the permission slip that you get from a curator like Sarah, who really knows her way around a commissioning process. Yeah.
It has strings.
Huh?
It has strings. There's
Well, yeah, I mean, I was just going to say it's not just a matter of saying yes and then, as you said, walking away. It's obviously yes plus an infrastructure in which it can happen, and it involves a lot of support. So it's not an easy thing to do, but certainly a super worthwhile one.
No.
Yeah. Hey, David, thank you for checking in, and
Pleasure.
thanks for watching. We have a question from Rebecca Elliott. This actually goes way back to the Dream Card show. So, Rebecca, are you with us? We hear you, I think. Maybe not. Well, maybe I'll just read out the question. Rebecca just says, with these installations and the outdoor ones at the High, did you have to regulate how long each person was allowed to experience them? And did some visitors monopolize the installations?
Oh, I hope people monopolize them. That's the dream. No, I mean, pre-COVID, post-COVID, I mean, I think we've got really different ways we're thinking about how people will navigate the galleries. For the car show, no. I mean, occasionally cell phones were dropped in the cars. I do think that was a problem. But there were some crowd issues, but we try, you try and build your exhibition design around that. Outside spaces, absolutely, there was no limitation. I mean, and there were moments, I remember, like school buses would get off and the elevators would open on the piazza and like 60 kids would come running, and you were like,
amazing.
Good luck, and I hope you're safe.
Hope the artwork.
We have Band-Aids standing by. Right. So no, we did not, but it is something, it's a different thing that we have to think about now. And I think that those are big questions that I'm thinking a lot about.
Yeah. I think especially curators like you that work a lot with interactivity and relational aesthetics, however we're going to describe it, it's going to be a new world for us, a new world for everybody, but that's a particularly intense rethinking that's going to have to happen. We have Caroline Kipp, also from the MFA Boston, who worked with Noni on the Women Take the Floor show aforementioned. And Caroline, I wonder if you wanted to say hi.
Hi, thanks for including me. And this has been such a great talk and so great to see this exhibit, all the exhibits. I mean, working with Noni was fantastic. And one of the things I really want to give her credit for was the fact that she acknowledged the joint effort that show really was. While she was the chief curator and the chief wrangler of all individuals, it was a institution-wide effort across departments to try and bring out these pieces of the collection that otherwise maybe hadn't been shown. Some had, certainly, and really just highlight the incredible power that women had, especially for me coming from the mid-century forward. And that's really where the focus of the exhibit was. So yeah, great.
That's great. Yeah, and that for people that are able to see the installation, that's very striking when you go into it, because you have so many different types of material, with the idea of women's great creativity as being a common tissue. So thanks, and thanks for tuning in this morning. It's great to have you here. We also have another colleague from New Orleans, Mel Buchanan. Are you there?
Oh.
Hey, Mel, how you doing? Oh, we can't hear you. That's better.
There we are. Sorry, I had to click a lot of buttons to get through. It's actually a very nerdy technical question about what the black patina was on David Clark's silver, but he chimed in to answer that. So
that was spray paint.
Yeah, I know. Is this some sort
very
of
technical?
I know. I was thinking, like, is this something I should have learned at Winterthur about Japanese black patina that's very special? And yeah.
It is a conservation nightmare, that piece, I will say.
Yeah.
Predictably. Yeah, salt incrustation is not usually your conservator's first recommended approach for caring for the silver collection. No. David's applauding. Let's hear from Vero Smith. There's a question.
Hey. Thank you so much for this wonderful talk and these inspiring exhibitions. I had a couple of questions about how our current COVID-19 situation is impacting your curatorial vision, Sarah, and also just about institutions in general. I'm a young curator. I'm transitioning out of my first full-time curatorial role, and I'm really worried about the future of museums and the future of academic institutions as well. So many of your projects are durational. They build on these long-standing, beautiful friendships and relationships. And I worry as an emerging professional that I'm not going to have the institutional support to foster those relationships moving forward. So that's part one. Part two is with these types of contingencies, both in staffing and in interactivity, right? We can't have these wonderful interactive experiences in gallery anymore. How are you thinking about your new exhibitions in the post-pandemic world? Thank you.
Okay, I don't know which one to tackle first. I will say I was never given permission to do anything that I did. I just did it. And I think for me, sometimes I feel a little lonely, I'm a decorative arts curator in an encyclopedic museum, so I kind of talk to myself a lot. And then I also think what I'm doing, and there's not a lot of people who are doing the same sort of things that I'm interested in doing. And but I like that. I mean, I feel like I just wait until somebody says no. And that's, I think you got to be brave. And I think if ever there is a moment right now to take chances and try new things, it is now. This is the opportunity. I feel like I mean, aside from the horrificness that is happening in the world, I find this an incredibly inspiring moment because one, I no longer need to justify that culture matters. Because what everybody is doing right now is reading. I mean, I go to Amazon and the first thing I see are books, which I feel like I haven't seen on the Amazon front page for like 15 years. And people are reading, people are listening to music, people are talking about how these things are healing and comforting. And I feel like so long we're always like, we matter, culture matters, we're important, and we add to your life. And now I'm like, okay, now we have to like earn that. Like, how do we think about ways to engage and be participatory? How do we think about what it means in the 21st century to change how we function? I find that so exciting. I'm just like, I don't know. So you tell me we can't touch? I'm going to try and figure out a different way to connect with people. And, that's what, we took Yuri's piece and we put it in a totally different context. I think it's just as strong. I think it's strong in a totally different way. We just took, I was speechless. We took words out of the equation. Now we're just taking touch out of the equation. And I think, how do you push yourself? I mean, those constraints are just parameters to push yourself farther. And so I would say just be bold and try things and experiment and make your own networks. I mean, most of the people, David will tell you, I cold called him. It was like, hi, I have this kind of crazy idea and would you like to talk to me about it? And, Lori with the Speechless show, she said no to me like 4 times. And I was like, no, but I think it's a great project. And she'd be like, no, I can't do it. I can't do it. It's not the right time for me. And I'm like, but just listen to me. Let me tell you, your passion and your commitment is what will inspire other people. And if you don't believe in the project, it's not going to go anywhere. But if you believe in an idea and you think you can figure out a way to make it happen, then you got to keep, and it's just like what we were talking about with Iris and yours. Immediate gratification is not the business we're in. So if you want an idea and you want it to happen tomorrow, this may not be the right business. But if you're like, I got a long game and I'm going to wait. Chris and I have been trying to think of something to do for a long time. And then just everything clicked and now it's happening. And there are a lot of people like that where you're just in conversations, you're just talking and you're just thinking. And then all of a sudden something clicks and you're like, okay, we can go. Let's do it.
It's such a great note to leave it on. And I really admire you indeed as a master of the long game. So, hey, let me just give a quick promo for next week. So we've reached another end of the week at Design and Dialogue. Next week, we have a really super lineup, I think. We have Stephen Burks, the New York City-based designer, on Monday. And then we have Jeannie Greenberg-Rohatyn, the proprietor of Salon 94 Gallery, on Wednesday. And then next Friday, interestingly enough, we have Monica Obnisky, who is your successor at the High Museum, and also Mel Buchanan's successor at the Milwaukee Art Museum. So curating is a small world. And she's going to be in dialogue with 2 of her curatorial collaborators, Darren Alfred from the Denver Art Museum, and also Bobby Tigerman from LACMA out in Los Angeles. So that'll be a really interesting follow-up to today's conversation, talking about curators working together with equal passion and commitment to what you have shown and talked about with us this morning, Sarah. So thank you so much. It's been fantastic.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for listening.